Alright, as I always say, if you want a specific section, so if you're only interested in the controls or the performance, then there'll be timestamps so you can jump to those things. It's been too many decades to count since Theme Hospital came out, but the team over at 2 Point Studios, published by Sega, have continued the trend of management sims in a direction that makes more sense to me, that being the museum. There's quite a bit to the game that you may not expect, different themes and scenarios, tours, going out on expeditions, and the inevitable Nintendo Switch 2 Performance, which I will go over in full and give you frame rates. Is 2 Point Museum on Nintendo Switch 2 an attraction you're going to want to visit, or might you be asking for your money back? Well, my name's Mark Walker. Cheers for watching. Nice one. Now, let's find out. Firstly, we've got story, or lack thereof. Now, the series as a whole has never really focused heavily on narrative, instead opting to plonk you in the role of a manager of a hospital, the dean of a campus, or in this case, the curator of a museum. And so that's what you do. The first museum you're handed, and I do say handed because it's really up and running by the time you gain control, is one that centers on the theme of prehistory. There are dino bones, fossils, but things feel very familiar if you've played any 2 Point or theme game in the past. But here it's all about exhibits, placing them down, decorating them to increase their overall appeal, and this then generates what's called buzz. Now I'm sure you can guess what that is, and the more buzzing everyone is, well, the happier they are, and the better reviews they'll give you by the time they eventually leave. Now things do get much more interesting, because with all of these games, I like to shoehorn my guests in a certain way. And here you're given things like one-way doors so that you can do exactly that. Guide them round the way that you want them to go so that they see absolutely everything. And why might I want to do that? Well, I have scattered my museums with a ton of donation pots to increase my amount of bunts, make a ton of wedge, and then reinvest it into the museum itself by hiring a bunch of new staff. And you can put out job advertisements as well so that you can find a staff member who is proficient in a particular museum theme so as to not constrain the player to one particular theme. Other ones include space, marine life, the supernatural, but to gain your exhibits, you're going to have to send certain staff members out on exhibitions. This quite intrigued me. I thought it was a cool idea. Sometimes you'll need to make specific items for them in the workshop so that they can gain advantages in some locations. So if you want to catch a big fish, you're going to need to make a big net, which will have to be researched and created. When they go out, you can choose whether to go really quickly, but at the cost of potentially being more dangerous, standard, or a detailed exhibition, which will gain you more rewards but takes much longer. On the subject of time, you can pause whenever you want by clicking the right stick in, and also speed it up if you'd rather progress through more quickly. Museum is a very tutorial-rich game, rich or heavy depending on how you look at it. It really guides you through almost every mechanic until you get to the further museums where you just let loose and you can go a bit more off the rails when it comes to creativity. Now, it's not just about spamming the museum with absolutely anything that you want to fill it with, as theme cohesion plays into its rating when you start to do things like tours around it. If you jump from the giant fossil to the frozen ice cube prehistoric man, that tour is going to be rubbish. If it's too long, they're going to get bored. So there is a nice little balancing act that takes place there. Other challenges that are dropped into your lap are things like school trips, flooding your museum with excitable sprogs that want to touch every exhibit, push things over, and generally cause havoc. It means you're going to have more professionals on the ground to try and clean up the mess they make, but also keep them happy, because these special events can net you some serious rewards. Let's talk about some Switch 2 specifics then. My expectations of the game were that it would have a mouse mode, it would have some form of touchscreen. Certainly one of those elements, even if they're not something that you enjoy, you'd hope to see it. And we don't. We don't see touchscreen, we don't see mouse mode. It's a missed opportunity in my opinion, having those there, especially when the game's already on PC, so supports mouse. But the control method they've gone for, it's easy enough. You pan with the right stick, move and place with the left, you can zoom in and out with triggers, and select items with A. For me, the thing with the latest 2 Point games, it's not necessarily that they're not enjoyable, because I really do like the setup. I think it's that after Hospital, they've struggled to recreate the kind of demands that it places on the player. When you had someone come in with a bloaty head, and you had to make a machine specifically to cure that ailment, or you had to go away and research those more advanced conditions and then stay on top of pandemics and things that took place, that generates a certain amount of excitement. With museum, you don't have quite the same feeling of pressure, for want of a better word. In fact, you rarely consider individual guests. The only real consideration is how they rating you, and you can see that by a symbol above their head when they leave at times. But bar major things like not having a toilet or getting stuck, it doesn't really focus on that granular level of management. Now, you can put the prices up on stalls, tweak the wages and salaries of your staff, and you can even train them as well. They actually level up as they go about their daily business. But pacing is something that they haven't quite got right with museum. The expedition system actually ends up creating a bit of a roadblock to your progress, because you have to go out, find an exhibit, wait however long until it comes back before you can actually display something new. There's this feeling of constantly waiting. Now, while there's a research element that comes in a bit later, that only really serves to enhance exhibitions. You do also receive some special items that you have to showcase within your museum to try and generate more buzz, and if you do so, you gain some rewards. But I didn't feel quite as compelled to do these things as I may have done. Now, I think the different themes was a really clever idea though, because you essentially have multiple different museums on the go at any one time, and you can move between them to increase their overall rankings, and it keeps it feeling fresh. So you could jump from your prehistory over to your marine life, then to your mishmash, expanding as well to new areas and plots. And don't get me wrong, they're very fun games. Particularly by the end, there is a feeling of some grinding just to reach those arbitrary star rankings. Still, they are enjoyable and pretty addictive, it has to be said. Gameplay scores 16 out of 20, while the controls, they score 14 out of 20. Let's go on to visuals and performance then, and these games run in Unity. And over on Xbox and PlayStation, we've seen 60 frames per second with some drops. On Switch, we have a 30 frames per second target with some drops. As the museum gets larger, you will see performance take a hit. Now, it's never terrible, and in a strategy game, it's not the priority, or it's not the major concern, I should say, that it is in some experiences, but still 25 to 27 FPS, it's not ideal, is it? The actual look of the game's quite nice, there's some shadowing, the 3D models look reasonable, but the bigger you get, the more you will see the hit to performance and some stuttering. The sound and audio is a hallmark of the series when it comes to things like the radio, and the announcer talking basically to the player is a really clever idea. Instead of having those constant tutorial prompts, instead it will say something like, guests are reminded that if they cannot find a place to donate, they should look harder, or we should add one. So I mean, it's a bit on the nose, but you know, it works for me.
If you've enjoyed your visit, please consider donating. I won't see any of it, but still.
Visuals and performance combined, they score 12 out of 20. Sound and audio scores 17 out of 20. One area museum gets spot on is the value. The game retails at £24.99 on the eShop. Seeing the way it performs, I understand why there isn't a Switch 1 version at the moment, but for that price you are getting a ton of gameplay. The world is your oyster when it comes to the way that you design your building. It gets more enjoyable the more exhibits you unlock, and the more themes you get. It works across every museum because you can incorporate those, meaning complete redesigns and improvements. There's some DLC as well, including a Sonic DLC, but it wasn't live for some reason. But I do think 24 quid is quite reasonable. I give value 17 out of 20. 2 Point Museum is a fun game, very addictive. I think I'm a little disappointed with the Switch 2 build as it stands right now. It's more than playable, especially in the earlier stages. You won't actually notice any performance drops at all, but as you get your museums to those massive scales, as we've seen on other platforms as well, in fairness, you will see some drops. Alright, is this one you're going to be grabbing? Let me know down in the comments what are your thoughts, and a thank you to the publisher for the review copy. For all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!